All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Marty Duffy, Liz Rhoades, and Lou Bryson, who all brought plenty of George Dickel swag this week in honor of special guest Nicole Austin from Cascade Hollow Distilling, the makers of George Dickel. I'll let your hosts give a more formal introduction to Nicole in just a moment. Real quick before we get started, I'm Will Hookinga from Savvy.co. As always, just want to point out a few different ways that you can interact with your host throughout the show today. So to your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from around the world. If you have a question at any point during the show, there's a button at the bottom that says ask a question. So just tap that button, enter your question, and I'll be keeping an eye out for those. And last but not least, you can invite your friends to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes that easy. But with that said, Marty, Liz, Lou, I will turn things over to you now.
Thanks, Will. And remember, Abraham Lincoln didn't die in vain. He died in Washington, D.C. And never turn your back on an actor. They are horribly dangerous. I've been shot numerous times by them. Luckily, it's in the back of my head, my least vulnerable part. Anyways, I'm Martin Duffy. I am a former senior master of whiskey for Diageo. Used to represent a little Tennessee whiskey brand. Let's see, for 18 glorious months, I don't know why I always laugh when I think about this. I was the national brand ambassador for Benedictine and B&B.
You brought the big bottle today. Nice.
So, yes, I do have a really big bottle, but
I've heard that.
Don't want to, it's propping
only
up
for special occasions.
A bunch of cardboard. Then for 8 glorious years, I was co-producer of the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo. And for the last nearly 7 years, I've been the sole North American brand representative for Glencairn Crystal. Oh, look at the brand. What's the name on that glass?
Look at that. Look at that. Look at that there.
Yeah, and then, and then, look. Oh, yeah, water. Oh, all the way from Tennessee. Liz?
Thanks for turning things over to me, Marty. Thanks for that intro.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, everyone. I'm Liz Rhoades, technical distiller and spirit consultant. Have just over a decade of experience across alcoholic beverage. Worked on a variety of substrates and products, including beer, rum, vodka, but my particular favorite and expertise, this stuff.
Yeah, baby.
Absolutely. Spent most of my career at a tiny little shop known as Diageo, but now am currently founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting. And hey, want to learn more? If you scroll down to the About the Host section, there's actually a little link to my website. So check it out.
Just also, a little tip there.
Yeah, because we know you industry people are watching. We know.
Yes.
You insiders. There's a link.
Little fact, I'm really excited to have Nicole on, a former colleague, of course. But my very first whiskey that I produced happened to be produced at Dickel. So,
nice.
Here.
I miss you every day.
I appreciate that. I missed you too. So glad you're on the show today. But Lou, turn things over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. I am Lou Bryson. I write about whiskey. I write about beer, but when I'm on here, let's just stick to whiskey. I was a managing editor of Whiskey Advocate magazine for 20 years, and have since gone back to freelancing. Flogging my latest book here, the old Whiskey Masterclass.
Yeah. God, that's so good. I read both of them at the same time.
Or is everyone supposed to hold up what they're currently trying to sell people?
No, we'll get to that. Which, I mean, now that with the cat's out of the bag, I might as well say, this is what I'm drinking today. I'm too Kristen today. I got a little... Okay, I'll figure this. There it is. I would be an awful dentist. I can't do this mirror shit. There we go. This is actually dug out the first release of the Dickel Bonded, which was just freaking awesome. What else? Wow, I think that's about it.
Why don't you introduce our guests?
I'm just going to roll into introducing our guest.
Austin Dickel.
Oh my God. Our guest today is Nicole Austin. Nicole has an amazing career for the short time she's been at it.
Doesn't feel short.
Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't. It was action-packed. Started out at Kings County Distilling in Brooklyn, distilled an award-winning rye whiskey, consulted with Dave Pickerell for a while, and essentially built the Tullamore Dew distillery.
Turn it on.
Okay.
You turned it on.
Amazing, awesome place. And then took the keys to Cascade Hollow, where they make Dickel. And while she was doing that, found time to help found not only the New York State Distillers Guild, but the ACSA, and did a lot of heavy lifting on getting the federal excise tax reduced on craft spirits. Holy shit.
Scarred for life. Scarred for life, literally. I have a tattoo about it.
I heard about that. I want to see that. Show that up here.
Oh God, now I have to figure out how mirrors work also. There we go.
I know.
It is the
That's
2017
the bill, right?
Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act.
Nice.
Obviously, like you would immediately recognize that.
Right. That's going to hang up in the museum someday after you die.
My arm.
Yeah.
Oh, there's that little piece.
That's a thing. Skin wall art. That's a thing.
Listen,
oh my God! Wow, we're talking about this. It was a thing
getting that done. So, Mark and I both were like, I guess we're so scarred from it, we should, get official.
Physically show out there.
Fantastic. So, I just gave a really brief thing there. Can you take us back and walk us through? How the hell did you get to Kings County?
Just a little light stalking behavior. Some kind of borderline. I knew desperately that I wanted to be in this industry. Once I figured out that it was an industry that existed, which took a minute. But once I was aware that like a chemical engineer possibly had skills that could be relevant to make whiskey, I was like, oh my God, why didn't anybody say anything like sooner? And then, for anyone who's a whiskey enthusiast now, you guys you've been around for a long time and you remember, but in 2008, 2009, there was craft spirits in the US wasn't really a thing yet, it was still a very kind of closed off industry. So I spent a couple
I have to assume though, if you'd gotten your chemical engineering degree from UK, they might have mentioned the possibility of distilling, or
I think they may have. Yeah, I made the unfortunate mistake of going to school in the Northeast, They didn't mention it. No one said anything. I ended up in environmental engineering actually. So I was working in New York. I was doing water and wastewater work. So I was doing design services during construction for big wastewater treatment plant projects in New York City. My New York tour is very interesting. I have a favorite wastewater treatment plant. All the Law and Order episodes when they find a body in the sewers. I'm like, oh, I've been there. I know where that is. The Manhattan Grit Chamber, very fun place. I've oddly enough, not what I wanted to do with my whole life.
Actually, that reminds me. I didn't ask and didn't say. Where are you originally from? Are you from New York?
I'm from upstate New York originally. Yeah, Syracuse.
Oh, where? Oh, Syracuse. Okay. Mm-hmm. My wife's family's up around there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the world. I miss it. I haven't been back in a minute. But yeah, people now, it's almost, it really hasn't been that long, but it's so easy to forget, I think, how much the industry has changed, how much openness and opportunity there is now that just was not present, in that pre-2010 kind of era. And so I spent a few years trying to get into the industry and writing very perky little emails about how, I would definitely be an asset to your company, and mostly getting responses back that are we don't have a company yet. It's an idea, Or like, oh, I'm sorry, like you don't have the right last name, so this one's off limits to you. And it changed. So Kings County was the first distillery to get licensed in New York City post-Prohibition. And so when they got their license, there was like a little blurb about it. I don't even remember where I read it. But I like showed up at their doorstep essentially. It was like, I will work here now. And they're like, we don't have any money. And I was like, that's fine. Just like make me a partner, make me into something. I'm an idiot. Sweat equity. I don't know. That's a word I've heard of. Like, sure, this seems fine. Like us,
Same, similar story.
It wasn't the smartest, but like whatever. I got in the door. So that's how I got into the industry. That was 2010. That was so they got licensed in April of 2010. I joined the company in July.
And you were there for how long, Nicole?
Till 2016. Yeah, so I was their master blender from July of 2010 to like September 2016.
So then how did William Grant come along, sweep you up and take you to Ireland?
So I'm sure it will shock exactly none of you to learn that like our tiny little Brooklyn distillery did not also pay my Brooklyn rent. So money just goes into those, right? Like it doesn't come back out. And so I kept my day job for the first couple of years and then quit when I was able to quit because Dave hired me to consult with him. And so like kind of doing both at the same time was how I was able to quit my day job. And that was like 2013 maybe. And I worked with him. So I did both for a few years. And then as Kings County grew and kind of needed me more, I stopped consulting with Dave and mostly was at Kings County, but then also did just some consulting on my own on the side. And I did some work for William Grant. And then on the back of that, they offered me the commissioning engineer role at Tullamore. And that was like, talk about a once in a lifetime opportunity. How many distilleries are going to get built from, a greenfield in my lifetime? Probably not that many. So I definitely couldn't say no.
Well, we were talking about this earlier. What was the culture shock for you, moving from Brooklyn? I had the same thing. I lived in Dublin for 2 years for Diageo, and even Dublin, though, isn't Tullamore. So if you were living in the west or even the central parts of Ireland, very different from Brooklyn.
It is. I grew up in upstate New York. So like, I lived in kind of the edge of the suburbs when I was growing up. So, and rural communities are something that I knew and loved already. And I think I was kind of ready to leave Brooklyn, like I did my 20s, I did them hard, now I maybe want like a washer and dryer in the place that I live, like the ultimate in luxury. So I was ready to go. And I was just so excited about like Ireland. It's like the land of whiskey and horses, like everywhere. Like where else would you want to be? Right.
Did you grow up writing? I know you. Okay.
I did.
Oh, wow.
My poor mother, who desperately tried to get me interested in literally any other activity. And I was like, pony. Pony, I want a pony. She's like, violin, no. Gymnastics, no. Nothing that just requires me to buy you like a ball and some sneakers. Like, no, you want a pony. Okay, great.
No upkeep at all with that, right?
No.
Poor mother.
I was the same way. I lived on the southwest side of Chicago. Insisted on having a string of ponies.
A pony?
Yeah, lots of them. Mom was upset, but they fit in my room.
Very tiny ponies.
Yeah.
Like
Strap on.
They're all plastic. All plastic.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I loved it there, actually. Honestly, I think I would have stayed if not for this opportunity with Dickel.
So did they come looking, or?
They did. Yeah, they called
did.
Me. Yeah.
Really?
And funnily enough, of course, me being me, I tried to like give away the job when they called me. I was like, oh, this job sounds amazing. Like there's so many people in the industry that would be so good for this. And I just start like naming names of all these people that I think would be eminently qualified to do this job. And the recruiter, she's so sweet. She was like, stop talking. Like that's where I'm trying to hire you. And I was like, oh my God. What? Forget every name I just said. Yes, I would love to.
Yeah, they all suck.
They're all terrible, actually. Yeah.
I thought they make good assistants.
Yes.
Theoretically,
right. I mean, maybe like after the interview process, maybe. Yeah.
So, what was it like? Now, you know, like, as I said, you go from Brooklyn to Ireland. Mm-hmm. Now you go from Ireland to Tennessee. I mean, those
not
are
just Tennessee. Not just Tennessee.
Indeed.
Tullafreakin-Homa.
Indeed.
That's right. Yeah. You're not in the middle of Nashville.
No, you're not. Yeah. No, you're not.
No, I'm closer to Alabama than I am to Nashville at this particular moment.
And the Dickel
distillery. I talk a lot about how rural it is here. This makes, Tullahoma makes this look like, town anyway. It's not a big city.
Even if you go to Tullahoma, finding the Dickel distillery, I thought that was kind of the fun part of that distillery. It's like the Bat Cave. I mean, you gotta.
Yeah, and no one there can help you either because there's still no cell phone service. So, like, you gotta just find it. Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah.
It's like going to what's his name, Castle and Key. You just keep going down that goddamn hill, and you're like, they're screwing with me.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it opens up like into the. You're like, oh, it's like a mirage that like emerges in the distance. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Now, I haven't been to Dickel in about 6 years.
It hasn't changed much.
No. So it still has all the. You know what I loved about it? One time I went. John Lund was there, and he was taking us around, and we went into the still house, and there was a chair with a book and one of those little overhead lamps there, and it was the guy who watched the window on the still. You know, that was his place. And I thought, oh my God, I love this. He went out on break. So I guess, but that's what he had to do. It was the old fashioned way. I thought it was so great. It was so old school still.
Well, the thing that got me was they had those circular recording graphs that you put the piece of paper in.
Yeah, the spirographs. So
and every place I've ever seen them, they were just there.
I know.
And they were still working.
We still use the ones on the fermentation. We have upgraded the distillation controls for some improved safety. And I think very happy with how that's turned out. But we still have the ones.
I'm just amazed that they still make the paper for them.
I know, right? Like there's so much in there that like we have, I think probably one of the most sophisticated maintenance departments for a distillery of our size, because so much of the equipment in there, like, you can't get change parts for. Our folks need to be able to like rebuild the thing themselves. We are, I think, slowly, convincing the mothership that we're worth investing in and making some thoughtful improvements. Because those are obviously like quite quaint, but also like not the best for safety and controls. So making some upgrades, but we still use the one that controls the wort temperature on the heat exchanger that transfers into the fermenters. And
do you still burn the ricks twice a year?
Yep. That still happens on site.
Now, the first time you saw, did you go when you first started working for them? Did you go down there? And I think it's like at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning.
I did not show up at 5 a.m. No. It was like 4 a.m. And I was like, cool. I mean, this will be burning all day. Like, I'll catch you later.
Mid char.
I've seen fire. I mean,
I would so bring a big ass bag of marshmallows. I really would. I couldn't help myself.
That's pretty intense, though. Where they waited until 1 p.m. for us to show up. They did it, and there was a guy named Peanut and another fella, and they were very funny. They were almost like Gilligan and the Skipper, one big guy and one little guy, and that control the fire and put it out. But you could not get within 60, 70 feet of that fire.
It's intense. It's big.
It was so intense.
It's quite, I mean, what they do with that skill, when you think about it, like the burning it just enough, not too much, it's pretty fine controls actually for something that's, a hose, basically.
Yeah. No, that's what I was amazed at. They did look like little pellets, basically, for the most part. Once they finished up, I thought, wow, this is... it's kind of labor intensive that the other guy down there, you don't really see them doing that.
Sure they do.
Well, they do it, but they can't. They have to do it underneath the thing because they burn so much of it.
Yes, yeah, they do it on a lot more regular basis than we do. The scale is slightly different. Yeah.
It's to me, it just felt mass produced charcoal pellets.
I mean, fire's fire.
Yeah.
They take wood, they light it on fire.
Arsonist.
Distilling it down. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there like a rule you have to make that one like at least one?
Yeah, it's a thing. Like it just happens.
Well, what would you say is the biggest difference between these three distilleries? I mean, obviously, Kings County is much smaller than the other two, but what other things kind of really did you have to adjust for, if anything?
Yeah, the scale difference was the hardest for me. Like it was very much there's two extremes. Like Kings County was everything manual, very small, which is challenging from a place of like maintaining consistency, but you also have like total control. Like I could taste every single barrel before it was dumped. You could be in the distillery every day, you could touch things, change things. Like the scale of it was very manageable and kind of ownable for one person. So there was like, those pluses and minuses. And also, you could do a lot of like, because you're so small scale, and Dave used to talk about this all the time, like, you can take some more risks with like trying things out because, if it's awful and you have to dump it out, it's only 50 gallons, like who cares? So you're able to be a little more experimental, I guess. And then Tullamore, that was a real like marriage of the engineering and whiskey, right? Like that was, you could run the whole distillery from the control room, and it was, we had really good lab technology to just really support the highest possible degree of consistency. And your job basically by the time the thing was running well was to make sure that nothing ever changes, and from a scale perspective, I mean, I made as much in one shift there as we did in like a year at Kings County, so just really different. And Dickel is, it's interesting because it kind of sits right in the middle of those two. And that has like, it has the best and worst of both worlds, right? Like in that it's kind of too big for me to like, for, when I'm doing a blend or something, like I can't nose every single barrel, but it's too small for small variances not to matter, so figuring out how to achieve like consistency and sort of what quality management looks like on this scale has been really interesting for me. And then, as you described it, like we have scale and we have a lot of skill in the distillery, but we don't have that fine-tuned controls and the excellent historians and the like, a lab right behind the control room. Like we don't have those things, but we still have sort of an expectation of achieving that level of consistency. And so kind of figuring that part out, right? Like what does quality management look like at this scale has been a really interesting challenge.
There was something I wanted to ask, and this is, we spoke yesterday. I interviewed Nicole for a story yesterday, and we talked about some of this stuff already. And
it was delightful, by the way.
Thank you. I had a good time. One of the things that came out of that, you and I both talked a lot about looking at it as a whiskey drinker. At looking at things through that lens. As a whiskey drinker, what should I know about Cascade Hollow that I probably don't?
Tennessee whiskey is bourbon.
All right, we're going right to it. Very good. Okay.
Yeah. Do you like
bourbon? Explain that
Do you like
perspective
bourbon, and why have you been overlooking this quietly amazing bourbon distillery that's been there for the last like 150 years, quietly making some genuinely excellent bourbon? Tennessee whiskey is bourbon. Hello, whiskey drinkers. Yes.
Yeah, the whole Tennessee whiskey thing has really been driven by Jack Daniels.
Totally.
And it's funny, it's something that has been it's been helpful to a degree for some of the Tennessee whiskeys, but at the same time, I think you're right. Always some bourbon guys will turn their nose up at it. Not really kind of understanding.
Yeah, and fair. I mean, like you did to ourselves, created so we're successful at creating the distinct category that we lost the thread of the connection to the whole. And the way I best kind of explain it to people, and I think the way to best understand it is Tennessee whiskey is a regional identity of bourbon, but I think the regional identity is actually established and so strong and independent that like we lost the of bourbon part of that sentence.
Yeah, yesterday you compared it to like Islay whiskey. Islay whiskey is clearly a thing unto itself, but at the same time, it's also clearly Scotch whiskey.
Yeah. I think that's a really good metaphor. It's one I go to all the time, right? Because there's also a lot of there's like a lot of stylistic room, in Islay Scotch, right? Like you can sort of generically say it's peaty, right? But then you've got all sorts of producers independently who take really different approaches to that on the island, and some of them are really, really lean heavily into that aspect. Some of them don't touch it at all or barely, so you're sort of making a generalization that is like sort of vaguely useful, but then you still got to like kind of drill down into the individual producers to understand it. But it's still also clearly, as you said, Scotch, even though Lefroy tastes nothing like Macallan, and but they're still related.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like we don't do that enough with bourbon. We're too busy trying to make it all the same.
Well, it's like a lot of people also think bourbon. There's still a lot of people think real bourbon, only can come from Kentucky.
Yep.
And it's like, hello, are you crazy?
Sure. From that point,
well, I mean, I guess the Kentucky distillery.
No, Liz, you're never going to get to talk.
They can try to do that.
I'm just gonna. Here, it's gonna no. Well, no, I was gonna just comment on that. If you think about the new regional styles of bourbon, right? Missouri bourbon, is that a positive thing or is that a negative thing as a consumer and as an industry? I guess is the question.
I think it's super positive because actually the reason I even know what Tennessee whiskey is, and so I can hardly fault even the whiskey enthusiasts now who don't, because I thought of myself as like an uber whiskey nerd, and I didn't know anything about Tennessee whiskey. I could have recited every like yeast strain of whoever, and but I didn't know. And it wasn't until we were creating Empire Rye, and we were like sitting back in New York and saying like, well, we saw the advantage of having like a coherent regional identity. And I think, again, kind of going back to what Scotch had achieved, like that was going to be really relevant. And we were like, well, has anyone done it in America? Right. And then you're like, oh, Tennessee whiskey, like that's actually a state law. It wasn't until we were asking that question ourselves when you sort of realized, oh, actually someone has done that quite successfully. So it was my hope, and I think it still is my hope, that the more of those there are, like the more sort of regions and states like take it upon themselves to create those identities, like Missouri, Texas, even like American single malt as a category. I think when people start to understand that American whiskey goes beyond Kentucky bourbon, I think that will help all of us. But I also think that's kind of a long journey. So like in the meantime, it's bourbon.
Yeah. How tying it back, so there's region, but also, with the Empire, rye, that's obviously, regional raw materials versus if you look at Tennessee whiskey, you think about the Lincoln County process. So that's raw materials versus the process step. How important is that to the regional styles, or is it more about, we're here in Tennessee, we're here in New York, et cetera?
Yeah, I think we thought a lot about that. Like, so when we were creating Empire Rye, like how do you do this right? So what's relevant? And I think it has to be relevant to the consumer in some way, right? Like it has to give them some piece of information about what the thing they're buying is going to be like in order to be useful, so if you don't put some boundaries around it, then there's too much variation where then they don't kind of come together coherently as a category. So even like with Empire Rye, obviously we started with the idea of like that the rye has to come from here, but there's also a lot of boundaries around maturation, right? Like the proof that it goes into the barrel and, ages and like the types, right? So it's not just like do whatever you want as long as you're using New York rye. because that was too broad. It was like, well, then it would never emerge like kind of coherently as a category where it could ever have anything in common, even though we didn't know at the time what that would be, but we're like, we need to put some boundaries on it so that people can be creative, but still it's like useful to consumers. And I think that's the thing that kind of makes or breaks a successful regional identity. Is like, it has to tell you something. Otherwise it's just an ego trip for the participants. Like if it doesn't mean something to the person buying the bottle, then what is it doing for you?
Right. Other than geographical.
Yeah. Which even that, like they only have relevance if it means something about the product, like even if you're geographical designations in wine, typically you have to prove, if you want to apply for one, that you're drawing the geography in a way that is genuinely unique, like you can't just draw a box on the map, right? Like it ties to something that's like a valley or a water source, it has to tie to something. And with grain, you don't quite have that, right? Like, if you're saying New York State rye, like, well, that doesn't actually really tell you a ton. I mean, like when you cross the border from growing something in like the southernmost county of New York or the northernmost county of Pennsylvania, like, is it massively different?
Yeah. State versus Vermont, like
same
varietals that are gonna thrive in that climate, right?
Right, and we're not wine. Like we have so many more production interventions at every, we have so many more choices that we can make as distillers than a vintner and winemaker does, like that you need to draw some boundaries beyond that, I think, for it to be relevant.
Right. But so, I mean, what it could also cause is an avalanche of people coming out with this, even though they can create something to tie it to. I mean, in a way, it's marketing. Calling it Tennessee whiskey is marketing.
Absolutely.
And it's funny, you look at the Scots, and the Scots have felt they've painted themselves into a corner as far as innovation, but they've also have tried to escape, Johnny Walker, fine Diageo blended Scotch. For the longest time, that we used to wear kilts originally when we represented it. A bunch of, Americans running around in kilts. But they stopped that, and they bought us Hugo Boss suits instead, because they didn't want it. They wanted it to be an international whiskey. And even Dewar's used to have the bagpiper. They got rid of that because they wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to make it international. So they wanted to disconnect it, which is something that you wonder won't happen with some of these, because you tie yourself into a marketing thing.
I mean, because that's success, right? Like that evolution means that you've achieved that kind of relevance, right? Like I hope that I'm one day having a concern about how Tennessee whiskey is perceived globally. Like, wouldn't that be fantastic? If I ever have to make that decision, I'll be thrilled. And I think anyone would say the same about Empire Rye, like, or any one of those, right? Like it's a weird industry because you kind of have to have a little bit of ego, I think, to even participate. Like when we were writing those rules, like you've got to believe that you're creating a legacy of something that's going to be relevant for the next 200 years. Otherwise, like, why do it? Because the time scales in which whiskey regions become relevant, and come into their own. Like, so I hope, I mean, God, that would be amazing. If Empire Rye was having a conversation as a little trade group about how we needed to be perceived in like Shanghai. Awesome. Like,
it would be something. Imagine that. All of a sudden,
I know.
New York distilleries are like the next Macallan, and
I think it's not impossible. I mean, everyone starts from somewhere.
No, from a tiny acorn grows a mighty oak, as Lou always told me.
It's possible.
I say that all the time.
Yeah, usually in my dreams.
And then the mighty oak has to sit in a marketing meeting and decide how it's gonna sell itself. That's life.
Are you a North Slope oak or a South Slope oak? Very important answer, sir.
Nicole, I've already gone through all the stages of grief on the fact that like it's not just the liquid that matters. Like I've been in denial, I've had anger, and now I'm in acceptance.
Struggle's real. I'm with you.
Now I'm in acceptance.
Nicole, what are your duties? I mean, you're not just a distiller blender there. You are manager.
It's a weird job. Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lot of folks like it in Diageo, I think, where they were sort of trying to reverse engineer like an acquisition type structure. I think sort of recognizing that like they're really, really good at large scale brands, but they weren't super good at like small brands, you know, and that at least the small brands that they had that worked well, you know, had some kind of like founder or like early group, you know, they were trying to like give someone a job where you actually would have sort of that holistic, like strategic look. So the distillery runs without me, you know, like they do not need me there to turn the boiler on in the morning, but it's like setting the quality standards, setting that strategic direction of like, what are we going to make? How much of it are we going to make? What is good enough or not good enough? You know, like those kinds of standards is a lot of what I do. So it's like everything from pricing and commercial stuff. So like, I don't design the marketing campaign, but I give like the boundaries of like, we should say this and not that, you know, or like, these are the values. And then on that side, then on the distillery side, it's like, again, kind of these are the values, right? Like this is what's important or not important about, you know, what we're doing. But there's a whole team of folks. So it's definitely not just me.
So I'm assuming it was you who were all responsible for this. In fact, there's a Whiskey Wash article that I posted on the Facebook page for A Sip of Knowledge. Interviews you. So why don't we talk about this?
Yeah, I'm on the road, so I'm just I can't fill the bottle. Okay.
Very shiny bottle. So I was responsible for basically like the idea, the strategy, right? But then like I'm not a designer, you know, so there were some other folks that like helped make the art, but I got to kind of approve. But I did blend the liquid. So I did that myself and then kind of approved all the strategic parts of like what goes into taking liquid and putting it in the bottle.
8 years of age, 45%. And it's the finest quality bourbon.
It is the finest quality bourbon.
Right.
And it's $33. I don't think you can overlook that.
Yeah, that's huge
right?
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for an 8-year-old.
That was the other thing about Dickel. I always told people it's like, dude.
Right.
Totally.
It's really good.
Like, stop turning your nose up because you're missing some of the best value. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know if that's changed much, but the fact that people always think if it's more expensive, it's better. The more I'm getting ripped off, the better it tastes.
I like to pay for what's on the bottle instead of what's in the bottle.
There's sort of an intersection. Yeah, it's of value and flavor profile and quality.
It's hard. It's a delicate dance. I mean, and that's actually something, you know, I was talking to Lou about that earlier of like, I'm really trying hard to pay attention to that intersection. And like, it's not that I'm never going to sell expensive whiskey. We just sold Cascade Moon for $250, you know, but I feel like it has to make sense, you know, like it has to be like worth that for a reason, you know? Yeah. And for like your everyday for bourbon, like I wanted it to, what's the point of creating it if people are just going to like sit on a shelf and let it collect dust? You know, like it needed to be a price like made sense to be like drinkable and that you could enjoy it and I don't know, like make it your everyday. I mean, that was the point. And also I think that exact thing that you described, Marty, of like, that's hopefully how I'm recruiting some people in that they can't possibly resist the enticement of like, you know, good price, good age statement, like good liquid. And that force will be strong enough to overcome any reluctance they might have about going south of that Kentucky border.
So how does this differ from, say, Dickel number 8?
It's all about blending. So, Dickel 12 is the one I always point to. That's kind of our flagship, right? Like that is a Tennessee whiskey. Like if you're gonna go into the metaphor of like Islay Scotch, like Dickel 12 is the Lefroy and the Lagavulin and the, like it's the one that's like, this is what it is. It's a big, bold, complex whiskey. That waxy fruit character is there really strongly. Got a lot of oak character. Like it's got a very strong identity. It's a whiskey drinker's whiskey. I think you gotta like whiskey, but if you like whiskey, it's amazing. There's a lot of depth and complexity. The bourbon, obviously we have a lot of barrels that deliver on that stylistically, but we also have a lot of barrels that have come out of that distillery that are not like that and are a lot more of this kind of balanced, lovely, vanilla fruit, like a little bit of spice, the oak is present but not strong, like just this really balanced that reminds me a lot more of what I would think of as like a classic bourbon. So, certainly you could blend it away, right, against those bigger, bolder barrels, but what a shame, right, if you can put it into a bottle itself and, let it sing on its own.
And you're maturing the barrels only they're about 3-4 high?
So we have 2 types of rickhouses on site. So we have single story rickhouses, which it's 6 barrels high. And then we have palletized warehouses. So we use both. What you're having now is all in the single story.
You should watch our episode next week when we have the Scotch bonnet. It's a new device for palletized barrels to save on the angel share. Hello.
Cool.
So, this is really but I'm I'm in the choir.
I appreciate that.
I'm already gonna. This is already good stuff.
That this came from the single story. That doesn't mean that it won't come from the palletized in the future?
No, it will. It definitely will. I think pretty soon, actually. And all the sampling out of there, and that's part of actually why I chose to release this. Is I'm actually even more confident that what comes out of those will, like the percentage that are more like this, that sort of really like lovely and balanced and style. I think is going to be higher when we start to dig into more of those palletized barrels. Just from what I've seen so far.
I'll tell you what, I'm really getting, because yesterday I was drinking number 12 and the bourbon. Yeah. Today drinking the bonded and the bourbon. The difference is even more pronounced for me, anyway.
The bottled and bond is pretty big whiskey, so good.
But that was something too I used to point out to folks when talking about Dickel's main competitor, that as their strength went down, their bottle strength, Dickel's, this is 45, and most of the Dickels are up there around 45.
Yeah.
So not that I'm a huge, the stronger the better, but I always thought 45 is a really good. Some of my favorite whiskeys are right in there at 45.
Yeah, I think so too.
Has that power and
yet
it carries the flavor and it's not hot. It's just boom, right on the market.
It's a real sweet spot. I agree, and it's like, especially if you're going to do something like a spirit forward cocktail. If you're like going to make an old fashioned or something, like you need a little bit. You need that little bit oomph.
This would taste really good in a Marty Duffy Manhattan.
What is
kind of famous Manhattan? It's just regular Manhattan.
made by
Marty Duffy.
Or four Marty Duffy.
A little cherry juice to my a couple of drops of cherry juice.
I think there's a really strong cherry note in this whiskey.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, like a Manhattan is spot on.
We've got some shout outs. So Brad Krause, hey, thanks for joining us from Austin Keaton from Blom Brothers. Hey Bloms.
Hi Bloms.
Hey Austin. And I took a look at the attendees. I did see a John Lunn out there. So, hey, John.
Oh, hey.
Hey, all right.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
And thank you for.
Do you ever keep in contact with John and Alyssa?
Back when we were all out and about, we used to run into each other all the time. But I haven't seen anyone in so long now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys were all at the same, I think it was Whiskey Fest New York.
Yes, that was so nice. Oh my God. And I think my mom went over and introduced herself with like great enthusiasm.
It'll be fun when their stuff is finally out. And
I'm really excited in general for like, when I'm talking about Tennessee whiskey as a category now, it's all sort of like assumptions from what I've seen at Dickel. Cause like, two producers does not make a category. Like it doesn't really tell you a ton. So I'm thrilled that like more folks are participating, and I'm hoping like 5 or 10 years from now you can actually do kind of a big lineup of like really mature Tennessee whiskeys and kind of do a vertical and start to see like, well, what is Tennessee whiskey character? Because right now I think we're making a lot of assumptions, right? Like I'm assuming that like sort of complex, waxy dark fruit characters, like that's a big thing. I know that's something that we're able to access because we're doing like both distillation and the charcoal mellowing as our separation processes. So, but that's one producer, right? Like that's an assumption that I'm kind of making, but I'm really curious to see when you get everybody's interpretation of like how to use charcoal into a room, what is that like?
Yeah. Cause I mean, the two big producers we have, I mean, you guys use charcoal in different ways. Is that not? That's correct, isn't it?
I mean, I think we're pretty similar when you think about the breadth of what everyone else is doing. Like we both lean into it pretty heavily, like, 2-3 day residence times on, the big distinction probably between the two of us is we chill our distillate before it enters charcoal mellowing tanks. But I definitely, knowing a little bit of what I know about what other folks are doing, like, just like on Isla, like some of them are kind of barely using the charcoal, right? Like it's just a really small part of their production process. Some of them are going wild and like putting the whiskey under pressure and trying to make it an extractive and additive process as well as a separation process.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of interesting, to see what actually comes out. And then I know like some folks are, rather than using like kind of the wood burned charcoal, using like traditional charcoal filters. So I'm going to be really curious. I think at the end of the day, those like heritage producers will have a lot more in common than different, given the breadth of what I'm seeing, from the audience.
I think that's it. I mean, the interesting part about our industry, right? Holistically, if you think about bourbon too, I mean, there's so much variance. I mean, we've had the conversation with a number of different Scotch whiskey producers around, are the regs kind of handcuffing you? What does that innovation look like? And I think overwhelmingly, everyone's been like, no, there's a lot of runway to play with. And I think that's, what's so exciting about our industry holistically, regardless if it's Tennessee whiskey or Scotch or bourbon, et cetera.
It's pretty fun. I mean, I'm excited, like knowing, I mean, that's the only tough thing about our industry is like, you get really psyched about something when you hear someone's doing it and you're like, in 4 years, you can taste. Just wait patiently with your joy and excitement. And then like one day you can see what this is like.
Right. Yeah.
Ronnie Edens at Buffalo Trace, the warehouse manager, talking about 15-year-old whiskey. And he's like, you get 2 shots at that.
Yeah.
You let one age to 15 years, you learn everything. And like, oh, I'll do that next time. And when that one's done, you're pretty much done too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that kind of industry.
Thing. I mean, you know what? I'm going to make a really old whiskey, like a 60-year-old whiskey. I can't wait.
I never know what it tastes like.
Delicious.
That's why I say we've all got to have kind of big egos, right? Because like you got to believe that you're going to be like still sticking around, like whenever what you're doing has come of age.
I am so sure that people are still going to be reading my book in 40 years. I'm sure of it.
Absolutely, that makes total sense.
They're still reading it now, Lou. They're still reading it now. That's what you kind of embrace.
Okay.
Nicole, one of the things, now, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you will. But
what are you talking about? I'm so poor.
Yeah.
Doesn't the I mean, obviously, Jack Daniels talks about their slow drip, which I always thought that I went on the tour and they're
Sounds like a medical problem.
Huh?
Sounds like a medical problem.
It was a slow nasal drip. That was the guy.
That's better. That's better. Okay.
But no, it doesn't make sense to me because they showed a video and you see the slow drip. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Water takes the path of least resistance, so you got a whole tank of charcoal. Doesn't
you
really
put
matter.
a wool pad on top to keep it.
And that spreads it out.
Yeah, but that's not what they showed on the video.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're making something good marketing. You make it look nice, but there's a wool pad.
Doesn't Dickel force the whiskey up into the tank and have it kind of?
Nope. We also drip. So we have. It's actually pretty similar setups. Like it comes in and there's a distribution tray that like makes it so that it's not like one flow, it like distributes. And it basically looks like rain, coming off the distribution tray onto charcoal wool.
Charcoal wool, is that the wool blanket? And if so, are those blankets available for sale afterwards?
We do have blankets from the same manufacturer. They're not those exact ones, but the same. It is like a amazing American heritage wool.
Can't you just
wool mill.
bourbon?
And then it's nice. Like a sieve, like a metal sieve at the bottom of the tank. And the charcoal kind of over time, it will like sort of naturally distribute itself like a multimedia filter where like the big parts kind of float to the top and the little particles like work their way down to the bottom. And they can run for 6 months, maybe more, before they need to be changed out. So they get pretty settled.
All right. Marketing idea for you. You get a lot of those blankets, you pour whiskey over them. You hang them on a clothesline there at the distillery. People show up. I want one.
Oh, God. But what a tragic thing to do with whiskey, though.
Not if it's still in there, and then you wring it out.
Fair.
Right back in the bottle.
Keep reusing it. Yeah.
Sell it to the same guy.
Maybe the next time I find whiskey that I don't love, maybe we'll.
There you go. That's all the mistakes.
Perfect use for it.
Oh,
perfect.
Went bad. Oh, pour it over.
I'm gonna start calling. I'll be like, that'll be my. Oh, this is wool blanket whiskey, and no one will know what I mean, and it's actually a real insult.
Better than horse blanket.
Yes.
Better than horse blanket.
Better. Yes.
See, I don't know. I think that sounds good. That could become a thing. This is my whiskey blanket.
They would sell.
Blanket whiskey.
They probably would. Yeah. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Get like Patagonia, co-brand.
Ooh.
All right. What about?
I thought I was getting out of the marketing meetings by being on this podcast.
You didn't know.
Anytime you're in a room with Marty, shit happens like that.
I'm just flicking ideas at the screen
every time.
Okay, Robert Pattinson.
Robert, what? What'd you say?
The flicking the whiskey at people.
I had a picture of Robert Pattinson wearing a shirt, and unfortunately, I didn't send it to Will. Look it up, folks. Robert Pattinson, the actor, wearing the fall. All you know is Jack. You don't know Dickel's shirt. Collector's item.
Oh my God, I love it. I'm not allowed. I'm in like pure corporate,
Yeah, you've probably gone as far as you can just by saying you like it. That's
true.
That's why I left.
So one of the things that I'm sorry, we're
at 5 minutes. Burning questions.
We want to get fired up on blending, because people don't get that shit.
I know. It's like they're obsessed with it in Scotch whiskey, but then completely forget about it when you cross the pond, even though I think it's frankly even more relevant because of the massive amount of variability that we see in barrels when you've got hot-ass climates like we have here. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, and we're getting first pass on the barrels, too. There's a hell of a lot more variation than they get.
That's what I'm saying, and it's so relevant. You'd think it'd be even more important in the American whiskey conversation.
See, it's just blend has become a bad word.
Yeah, and that's been for like 10 years. Are we not past that? Is that
No. It was longer than that. Blend was a bad word when I was your age, which I hate to have to say.
A lot of people that are doing it, Lou. There are a lot of people starting blended American whiskeys. I mean, there's a lot of.
Well, that's it. See, the thing is, you say blended American whiskey, and people think Kessler's.
I know what they think, but that's just it. It's it's the.
And that's the conflation of like blended whiskey with blending the concept, which is also really like
exactly.
a rough one. Yeah, like the idea of making any kind of conscious selection about which barrels go into a bottle, like that's important.
Yeah. You'd think that with the uprise of a master blender as a title that would have coincided with a more positive, right, like consumer perception, but
I think it's coming. I think it's like we've got to come up with a different word or something.
Of the drinkers that even know what a master blender exists.
Totally. No,
you're in the forest. All you can see is the trees.
I think we'll just go out to
you're in with us.
Dickel 12 and Dickel Bourbon and be like, see, it matters.
Yeah.
Well, and also too, I think when you see these master blenders, I think they associate with that brand.
Totally.
When you're a fan of that brand, it doesn't matter. But it's those people who are outside who aren't necessarily, who still turn their nose up at a Johnny Walker or Bushmills or any other kind of any kind of blend.
Yeah.
But I think the time is.
I hope so.
Soon come.
I hope so, and that's certainly fingers crossed from your lips to God's ears, because it needs to happen.
The thing that made the difference for me was when I realized that the Jameson, the rarest vintage reserve, is a blend. Yeah. I'm like, oh well, shit. Wait a minute.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But anytime you're dumping barrels together, it's a blend. But sometimes you do it intentionally, and sometimes you just like and dump them.
Well, that's why people they taste a single malt. They're unaware that that is also barrels or casks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
absolutely.
But it doesn't register. I said no, it's a single.
I was kind of hoping Compass Box as well would help like increase awareness of that, right? Like the blending as an art. Yeah.
What is that education process? I mean, Lou, would love your.
We're doing it right now, Liz. We're doing it right now.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're only doing it to
thousands and thousands.
Well, listen, that's not my fault.
Oh, sorry, right.
Like, draw your
that's
audience.
true.
It's marketing. Get Marty on the marketing.
Marketing.
I'm just one man. I'm a man in the wilderness.
Heard.
I go on my porch and I'll scream the stuff, and then the cops come.
Right, and we just do exactly what we've done now, 300 million more times, and then we get to about half of America, almost.
Well, this is going to be on YouTube, and people can watch it and share it.
I'm going to do some blending right now.
Ooh!
Ooh!
Oh my God!
You
Well, actually,
you got that power,
Nicole. I mean, that's kind of that's something that it's also something that on any distillery tour, very few people, if any, actually get to see a blending process take place, because it's.
I tried to sell the experience once for people to come blend. Actually, it wasn't my idea. It was Colin's idea. And they walked out because it was so boring.
Wow.
I felt really bad for them. It's just like, we're just going to sit here and not talk and not drink for like 4 hours. And they were like, I'm sorry, what?
Not talk and not drink?
Were you meditating? Take notes for hours. It's awful.
Well, you know what they did at Cardew once? They brought us in there and they had a tasting room, a nosing room.
Yes.
Where they did bring out various samples and say, okay, see this? This is where you use this style of whiskey because we want to bring this kind of character and this kind of character. And I thought, now that's really fascinating. Of course, it was a small room with about 12 of us. So, again, you have only 12 little disciples who then hopefully all 12 of us got something out of it and spread the word. But again, to Lou's point, small audience.
We're getting there.
Maybe you need the lady Nicole Austin Dickel channel, where when you're blending, you can show people.
It's like that's like the panda camera. It's like where nothing happens. But maybe people would be into it. Yeah, it's not a bad idea, right? It's like very peaceful, like just glassware slowly moving around.
Watching somebody sniff stuff.
Happy accidents.
Well,
no one looks good while they're actually nosing. You have like 5 chins. It's like not a good look.
God.
Like,
tell Fred Minnick that.
I watched Jim Murray nosing one time.
Yeah.
Holy shit! He
It's
looked like
not
a
cute.
spaniel having an orgasm. It was insane.
You have those demon eyes. You know how he has those demon eyes on his back?
Oh, the yellow, the whiskey colored eyes. That's an unretouched photo, by the way.
I made the mistake one time of like someone's like, oh, and will you nose whiskey for this like photo shoot? And I did it for real. And I was like, oh my god, do I look like that?
Everyone does that. That's everyone's like professional.
Yeah, but then you have to be like, yes, chin out, yes, up, good lighting, good angle, jawbone. Yeah, I can't smell a thing, but I look like I'm doing it right now. Yeah.
I'm not actually sniffing anything because bunny sniffs, right, aren't really an attractive thing to do.
Not at all. Not at all. All right, for all the industry folks out there, if you take nothing away from this podcast other than don't actually nose on camera.
And then wait a second.
Yeah. Like, excuse me while I smell my own armpit, and then I'm going to keep going. Yeah, so pretty.
Oh my god.
Future Vogue cover right there.
I hope so.
I still remember the first time I saw somebody doing that. I was just like, what the? What could...
I know.
But once they explain it, you're like, oh, okay.
That makes sense.
Well, I apologize. I have an actual job that I have to go do.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, bottled and bond babies.
Yes.
Everybody out there.
Well, for anyone actually watching, I can give a little secret for the meeting I'm about to step off into is to bring back Dickel 70.
Whoa,
bring it back.
God dang.
I'm gonna pipette drop.
The number of expressions you guys have now is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's what happens when you leave me alone in a pandemic with not having to be on the road all the time. So more to come.
Off to the warehouse. See ya.
Yeah. Back in the day, they ran out. They stopped producing for a number of years. I think it was in the late 90s. And they stopped producing, and then they ran out, and they had to bring out Cascade Hollow.
Well, this is definitely where I've got to leave the meeting.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. We'll say before everyone leaves, check back next week. We're gonna have Charles McLean. We're gonna have Charlie McLean back on for a second first time with Ross Morrison of the Scotch Bonnet. So come back next.
Not the peppers.
Different. It's a different thing, and it's going to be amazing. Nicole, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
It's so nice to hang with you guys. It was super fun. Always. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.